All right, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. We're starting on the bottom of Mem Gimel Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom at the word Tanya. And we'll be finishing the parak and learning until Mem Vav Amud Aleph at the end of the Mishnah, which is about 2/3 of the way down. As you can see, there's 3 lines on Mem Hey Amud Beis. And as you can also see, the Ran ran out of ink in one of his Bic pens because this is a ridiculous amount of writing. And it's actually an old sugya of Ein Breira versus Yesh Breira. We'll get into it briefly. Everybody relax.
The Shabbos stuff.
It's everywhere in Shas. It's everywhere. It's retroactive decision making. We'll get there soon. But first, we have to go back to the sugya that we were discussing in our Mishnah. Let's say Reuven and Shimon were traveling together. Reuven has all the food, but Shimon is aser b'hanaf from Reuven. So Shimon's going to starve. Shimon needs food, and Reuven is the one who holds the food. So the Mishnah had recommended that what should happen is that Reuven should take the food. He should put it on top of a rock or on top of a fence. And if Reuven is mafkir with his whole heart, then Shimon is allowed to be the beneficiary. That's no longer considered a hanaf because you can only have an isser hanaf. The items belong to Reuven, but if it doesn't belong to Reuven, all is well and good. And the Brisa says 3 lines from the bottom, Tanya. Hamafkir es sadehu, if a person is mafkir their field, Kol shlosha yamim yachol lachzor bo. For the first 3 days, you can renege on whatever hefker you did. Right? It's a strange halacha. 24 hours comes up in the Gemara, assume we reject that also. But the Gemara here says you have up to 3 days. And that means even if I'm mafkir and you take it and you go and you start planting, that's my field within 3 days. Don't start planting in the first 3 days. That's within the Tanakama. Mikan ve'elach, after the 72-hour mark, the Gemara says, Ein yachol lachzor bo, then the hefker decision that you made 3 days ago finally takes full effect. The Brisa continues on the top of Mem Daled Amud Aleph. Let's say Omar, Tehei Sadeh Zum Mufkeres Liyom Echad. This field is only going to be hefker for 1 day, l'Shabbos Echad for 1 week, l'Chodesh Echad for 1 month, l'Shana Achas for 1 year, l'Shavua Achas for 7 years. So then, Ad Shelo Zachaba, for as long as no one squats on that land or takes that item that you were mafkir, Bein Hu Bein Acher, for you or anybody else, if it sits there untouched, Yachol Lachzor Bo, even well beyond the 3 days, you can go up to 7 years, whatever the parameters were of your commitment, where you said Sadazu is mufkeres for X amount of time. As long as no one's touched it, then you can always take it back, no problem. However, mishazachaba bein hu bein acher, once somebody else, or if you recoup your losses and you say, you know what, I changed my mind, then it's no longer considered hefker, and yacholachzor bo, then the whole transaction is over. Okay, now what's the problem with this brisa? The problem with this brisa is that the reisha and the seifa sounds like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. On the one hand, we said 3 days, and then a line later we said 7 years. So says the Gemara posits, maybe we should say that Reisha is Rabbanan and Seifa is Rabbi Yossi. Which Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi are we talking about? So this goes back to the Mishnah on the Daf prior, Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, at the end of the Mishnah there. We had a machlokes about putting the food on top of the rock. According to the Rabbanan, they had said, V'hala notel v'ochel, that food is considered mufkar, and once I, Reuven, put it on top of that rock, you, Shimon, who have an Isser Hanaf from it, you can eat it right away, no problem at all. And Rabbi Yossi was the one who was Oser, and he said, no, this still doesn't work yet. And really, the Gemara's comparison to this machlokes is not so good, because what did the Rabbanan say over here? It's immediate. They don't say 3 days. They say it's immediate. That's the Gemara's comparison. Nevertheless, it's not a stark comparison, but the Gemara says that the Reisha, which says that it only takes 3 days for the hefker to actually take effect, that must be the sheet of the Rabbanan, because they believe that in short order, the food becomes mufkar, whatever is your item becomes hefker. Masha'en Kain in the Seifa, when it says up to 7 years, that it's still not gone yet, it's still not hefker yet, that must be the shita of Rabbi Yossi. Again, the Rishonim have to play around with this because it's really not a great comparison. It really isn't, and it should bother us. We're comparing our Mishnah, which says that the Tanakama says that it's immediate, that the hefker counts right away. Shimon can eat on the spot. Yet we're comparing him to the sheets of 3 days. Good question for the Rishonim, not for us, but that's a good question. So the Gemara provides 2 answers to this question. Answer number 1 is as follows: Amar Ula, 5-6 lines down, Mem Daled Amud Aleph. Ula says, Seifa nami Rabbanani. Really, the whole Mishnah is the Rabbanan. How could the Seifa be the Rabbanan? The Rabbanan were of the opinion that the hefker action that you did, that they were mafkir, that actually worked. So how can you say it's rabbanon? Yihachi. Then amai ad shelo zacha ba bein acher yachol lachzer. Why is it that we allow then up to 7 years? If you're saying that the mechanism of hefker actually works in short order, then what's with the 7-year deal? So then, according to Ula, the way that we can understand this whole brayso, according to the rabbanon, is shiny shana v'shavua delo shchichi. These types of verbal caveats. I want this to be mufkar for 7 years. That's weird. That's not a normal kind of a thing. And therefore, he agrees, and everyone would agree, Rabbi Yossi and the Tanna Kama would agree that in such a case, that it's not considered to be a full transaction yet. And if you give a specific parameter as to how long you want it to be mafkir, then you're allowed to take it back throughout that course of time. That's answer number one.
Between metaltalin and karka?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I assume you can be mafkir. It seems you can be mafkir anything, because this case was mafkir as sadehu. That's what our case was.
Right, no,
you could for sure be mafkir metaltalin.
Being able to mafsir it.
Same, as long as nobody takes it. So let's say I'm mafkir, something in my backyard. I put it in the alley, and none of the alley rats take it. It just stays there for years. So as long as nobody touches it, then then the mechanism of hefker has not been fully in effect yet.
No. What I'm saying is with respect to how could that food become available immediately to them if there's a 3-day.
That's what I said. That's a discussion in the Rishonim. That's not simple. I mean, we understand the Mishnah and we understand the Rabbanan, but to say that the Mishnah is this brisa is very difficult. But that's what the Gemara does assume it. It's not, your question is better. I don't have an answer for you. It requires Rishonim to dig in on that. That's a great question. And then the second answer as to how we can understand this brisa, because it does seem like the Reisha is the Rabbanan and the Seif is Rabbi Yossi. And the Gemara says 5 lines from the bottom of the page. Didn't take long to switch from 5 lines to the top to five lines to the bottom. Just wait till the next page when there aren't even 5 lines, and then it'll be even faster. And the Gemara says, no, really, Reish Lakish Amar Mi, the Seifa Rabbi Yossi, Reisha Nami Rabbi Yossi. Just like in the Seifa, we said that there's no kinyan of hefker yet. It's not done yet. If 7 years, the Reisha is also the case. So how in the Reisha? What was the case of the Reisha? The Reisha was 3 days. So ask the Gemara, the Reisha, Hainu Taima, the reason why in that case we added in a 3-day window was simply Delo Lishtakach Toras Hefker. We didn't want people to forget the dinim of hefker. Easy to forget some of the halachos. So we made a rule that there's a 3-day stall in the efficacy of your being mafki or something. Says the Gemara, Ihachi, if that's true, if you want to show the halachos of hefker, don't wait 3 days. Just if it's mafkir, then let somebody take it off your lawn right away. Says the Gemara, you're right. However, Amarabba, mibnei haramain demafkirin v'hadarin behon. Where here we needed to add 3 days because people were using hefker as a way to avoid paying meiser. Tax evasion is something that we've all heard of, hopefully that we're not guilty of. And the Gemara says over here that we were nervous about that back in the day. What was the issue here is that when a product is hefker, you don't have to pay meiser on hefker. You don't have to give meiser. It's not your product. You found, let's say it's food from a Shemitah year. You take that food, there's no meiser on that food. So the Ramayan, what they would do is they'd be mafkir the food and they'd bring it into their house. And then when they brought it into their house, it's not hefker anymore, it's theirs. But when they took it, it was from a place of hefker. So the Gemara says that we had a takana of 3-day delay in order to prevent the tricksters and the tax evaders from avoiding paying meiser. That's what the Gemara says. All right. Now, back in our Mishnah, we're on the bottom line now of Mem Daled. Back in our Mishnah, we had said that if a person places the food, if Ruvain places the food on a rock or on a fence and he's mafkir it, that Shimon is allowed to take it according to the Tanna Kama. And according to Rabbi Yossi, he is not allowed to take it. Aval, says the Gemara, Deoraisa, lo have hefker. But on a Torah level, is it not going to be hefker? Let's talk about this case. On the Deoraisa level, it could be that this would be misunderstood. What was Rabbi Yossi's injunction? Rabbi Yossi's injunction is that there's a 3-day delay. But really, what is it? During those 3 days, what is it? What? It's really ownerless, but we're afraid that people are going to make a big mistake. So during those 3 days, Doraisa lo have hefker. But says the Gemara on the top of Mem Daled on the base.
If this was only a takana, it's only a takana Rabbanan. Therefore, it must be the Doraisa hefker.
Correct. And therefore, says the Gemara on the top of Mem Daled Amud Beis, the Dilma Asi le'asure min hachiyuv ala pater min pater ala chiyuv. You may have thought that this product is now you may have made an error and thought that this product during these 3 days is deoraisa, and you may use these funds to pay off the meiser on a derabanan product, or vice versa. In which case, you're mixing deoraisa and derabanan and meiser. That's a huge problem, halachically speaking, because you're either taking food that's deoraisa for something that isn't deoraisa, and then you haven't done tithing there, that food remains usher, and vice versa is probably even worse, where you're taking meiser derabanan and trying to pater up your meiser deoraisa. Both are bad. And the Gemara therefore presents both sides. So how do we get out of this pickle? And the Gemara concludes, when you're doing meiser in this particular sample of the 3-day delay, you can only give meiser on the product itself. You can't use it on another product because we're afraid of the possibility of mixing meiser d'oraisa and meiser d'rabbanan. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second, 3 lines down. Meisvei, hamafkir es karmo. So I'm a mafkir my kerem. And then I wake up in the morning, uleshachar, amad, ubatzro. I get up and I start harvesting the grapes. So says the Gemara, how do we view that transaction? Were you mafkir it or were you not? Now, the night before we said you were mafkir, and then when you woke up, all of a sudden, maybe out of habit, maybe out of desire, you decided you were going to go harvest everything. Do you own that property as it relates to meiser? Yes or no? And the Gemara says that yes, you're chayav beperadu ve'ololosu v'shikcho v'peya. However, and this is the key part for us, upater mina meiser. Here, mideoraisa, clearly that product is not yours. It's still hefker, even though you're the one who worked the land and you are the one who harvested the grapes. The haraya that it says upater mina meiser. Now, on the page before, we learned about 2 different answers, one from Ula and one from Reish Lakish. Now, Bishlama Ula, that the entire brisa was derabanan k'tanila, u'deoraisa k'tanila. That mideoraisa during these 3 days, there was nothing. Then it was derabanan that it was those 3 days. It wasn't deoraisa. So then we can understand why it's pater mina meiser. However, Ela Reish Lakish, who understood the 2 parts of our brisa that we started with today as all being Rabbi Yossi. So then, amai pater mina meiser. Why then would you be pater? Rabbi Yossi says that that you're not allowed to be mafkir that property, in which case you're stuck. And that means that it's yours, and you should be chayiv in meiser, not pater in meiser. So what the Gemara is trying to posit that maybe Rabbi Yossi, maybe the shita of Reish Lakish is the wrong shita, and really Ula was correct in his understanding of the brisa. So the Gemara responds on behalf of Reish Lakish, Amar lach ki amrei ana Rabbi Yossi. You're right that when I was translating the brisa that we started with, you're right that I established the whole brisa, Reisha and Seifa, to be like Rav Yossi. But this brisa on Mem Daled Amud Beis that starts 3 lines down, Rabbanani. That's not a problem. He gets out of a very simple answer. It's actually very balabatisha answer. Like, no, that's Rav Yossi. This is it's easy peasy. Just going to cut it down the middle. It's an easy answer. Ibai Sema, there's another possibility. One is where hefker was done, not in a full bezdin, but only with 2 people. And one was where the hefker was done before 3 people. So the brisa where we say that he's pater mina meiser, that's going to be a case where that was not a sufficient hefker. It was only done ba'anpei train. Masha'en kain in the brisa that we saw earlier, that must have been ba'apei tzlasa. Da'am Rabbi Yochanan mishum Hashem ben Yehud Tzadok kol hamafkir bifnei shlosha have hefker bifnei shnaim lo have hefker. Beautiful distinction. However, not everybody agrees with this, and this is a side machlokes. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omar davar Torah. There's a halacha. That really the mechanism of hefker does not require a bezdin shel shlosha. It only requires the one person to be mafkir. Why then did the Chachamim say? Why did Rabbi Yoshua ben Yotzadok say that there needs to be 3? It wasn't for the reason that 2 is not hefker and 3 is hefker, but rather kadei sheyehei echad zochev v'shnayim me'idin. This is different. We don't need bezdin. We need edus. The different mechanisms, right? Bezdin is in front of 3. No, that's not why we have 3. This 3 isn't because of Bezdin. This 3 is so that the one who's one of the 3, the one who's doing the hefker mechanism, he's in front of Aiden. There's testimony that that's true. So that's the difference between these 2 different approaches. Hadron Allah, Ein Bein Hamudar Yiratzim should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. That brings us to a new parak. Parak HaShutfin. We're going to learn this Mishnah. This Mishnah has 5 cases in it. And then on Shabbos, we're going to start digging in on this. As I mentioned in the chat, Daf Yomi is only 30 minutes before Mincha and Shabbos. And during the winter, I'm going to try and cheat a little bit to give us a little bit more time to sleep at the table before we come to sleep at this table. So says the Gemara as follows. Mem Hamid Beis Nu Parak HaShutfin. Partners, we're in business together. However, we don't like each other that much. Neither of us can get hana from one another. Says the Gemara, asurin likanas l'chatzer, but we both own one property. We're not allowed to walk into the property, neither of us can't walk in. because I'm stepping on your square and you're stepping on my square. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Ze nichnas lesoch shelo, v'ze nichnas lesoch shelo. You can go in, and we're under the assumption that the Daled Amos that you're standing in are yours, and the Daled Amos that he's standing in are his. Now, how does this work? So the Rishonim here explain at tremendous length. The Rishonim here explain that this is the difference between Ein Breira and Yesh Breira. Let's review. We've probably had this sugya 10 times in Shas, probably more. That Ein Breira and Yesh Breira is as follows. The example given in the Rishonim is an example of a barrel of wine, and you're thirsty, and you haven't given truma yet. Are you allowed to drink the wine before you're mafresh the truma? Yes or no? So according to the opinion of Ein Breira, that we don't look at the end to determine what was true in the beginning, so then how do I know that the particles, the molecules of wine that were left over was actually the truma molecules of wine? Therefore, they say, because we can't drink all the way to that small shiur and say, oh, look, therefore it worked out. Ein Breira. We're not allowed to look back in time and retroactively re-engineer what we wanted to work out. That doesn't work. Ein Breira. So you can't even drink the wine until you're mafkir. Masha Einkin, according to the other opinion where we say Yesh Breira, drink, leave over the right amount in the barrel. Retroactively, clearly, everything else that I drank must not have been truma because the truma is sitting in front of me. That's called yesh breira. And here we're employing the same split between the Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. The Tanakama was of the opinion that when these partners have an Isra Hanan one another, you can't walk into the field because we're not willing to say that had it been that down the road that yesh breira, they don't say yesh breira. The Tanakama is very strict. So therefore, when I step on this tile, so it may be mine, maybe yours. There's an Isra Hana. That's not allowed. We have a Mudar Hana between us. Ein Breira. But Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, because if and when the business splits, there's dividends and we pay out, and let's say this property gets split, okay, then that's where everything worked out. And that's going to be a case of Yesh Breira. And we'll see this play out again in just a moment. But let's finish up case number 1, top of Mem Vav Amud Aleph. We're continuing in the Mishnah.
This is the wine, it's a singular barrel, right? What you're left with, what here, the field, you're going into it 30, 40, 50 pounds.
Correct.
You can't say like, oh, this was his and this was.
It's not a very good comparison, but the concept is correct. You're right. The sampling is not the same because we're dealing with, I took a step on this piece of dirt. And then, let's say we were to take footsteps, I'm the yellow footsteps and you.
So the first time you do that, that's fine. And now you could say that this is, and this was yours and this was yours. That's clear in time.
Tomorrow, who says it doesn't go each time?
It has to be that way.
When you slip, let's say you.
It has to be that way. By the way, the wine sloshes in the barrel too. It's not like,
the whole point of
I know, that's
what's
right. That's what I'm saying is that like,
really set it aside.
it's not really set aside until it's done. And if at the end, when they split the property in half,
It's worse because
you
don't put the wine back and take out the wine like you would to an extent.
Right.
But I think each is a separate sample.
I think you're right. I I didn't say that in the Rishona, but I have a feeling that that's the case. Anyone want to skim through the Ron? a little skim. We've got some extra time tonight. We've got some time. There's no question. Look at the last Mefarish, just as very short. To Kosover Yesh Breira, he does look at it with very simplistically. Obviously, we're going to walk on different parts of the property, but when we split, we'll be like, okay, this was Phil's and this was Stan's. Just we're going to look at it very cleanly in the end. I agree, and even when I saw this, I agree that it's a strange comparison. And really what it means is that we're misunderstanding the comparison, is that Yesh Breira is broad enough that it can have applications in both worlds.
Fourth wide line.
Fourth wide line?
Fourth wide line. At the very end. Called Shah B'Shah. Every time he goes in, he's walking on it.
The guf hachatzer knuyelo legamre leoso tashmish. Yeah. We'd have to see it all in context, but that could be that.
Whether it's a kidney of Shiva kidney, there's a lot.
You're saying he goes in 5 days.
It's a kidney
without a kidney.
On day 1, it was mutter because of Breira.
It's a kidney of Shiva, not a kidney of goof. If it's goof, then you're done, right?
Mhm,
Right.
mhm, mhm.
That's what it says. I'm not really sure what the concept is. It's what you call it.
It's a bit of a chefza gabra distinction of. No. We're talking about walking, just walking around, being on the property. Yeah, seems that way. I didn't read this Ron, so I don't know. Don't hold it against me. I probably should have read it. Anyways, the Gemara says, the Mishnah says on the top of Mem Vav Amud Aleph, Ushneim Asurim Lahamed Rechaim B'Tanu Legadol Tarnagol. But everyone agrees that it's not a case of Breira when you're benefiting from a tool itself. Because the whole tool is going to be used. It's not like a Breira thing.
can.
It's an Isser Hana.
Once you put it down.
Well, it's more
That's
like
it.
when you're grinding with the mill,
That's
then
not Muhammad to bring them in.
right. The reason why it's usher is because the whole item is not. We don't split that item. That item is one entity, so it's an Isser Hana.
I think Muhammad needs to bring in the milk. But then already.
You're not allowed to.
Tomorrow, you don't have a shot at that.
Correct.
Right, I can't then say, well, since half is mine, I'm gonna bring my oven in here, because then already you're taking that space.
That spot is
yourself,
yours. Mhm.
And there's no more sheet, now it's a kid.
Right, and you can't split that
And then-
because I took that spot, so there's no brera to happen. It undoes the brera. Okay, case number 2 in this Mishnah. It wasn't a two-way hatred, just a one-way hatred. And the Gemara then says, Lo yikanis l'chatzer. Tanakama says you can't go in. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, l'shitaso says, Omer yachal hu lomar. The guy can say, l'soch sheli ani nichnas, ve'eni nichnas l'soch shelcha, because of brera. Where I'm stepping right now is mine. And tomorrow when I come in and I step somewhere else, that's going to be mine that day. And that's how brera is going to function. This is fascinating. We force the person who has the Isser Hana on himself to sell his part because we're afraid that he's going to violate the Isser Hana. That's very strange. But that's what the Gemara says. Take a look at the Mefarish 3 lines down. The Mefarish says, Kofen es hanoder, shehider es chavero limkor es chelko, shehider es chavero, limkor es chelko, asan l'rabanan de amri asurin likanis l'chatzer. Yeah, this seems to be like that shita, that there's no brera. It seems to be that way. Third case. We had a third person, Ruvain and Shimon. There's an Isser Hana there. And Levi is also involved. So Levi, so Levi has an Isser Hana with one of them. Lo yikanis l'chatzer, he can't go in. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov omer l'shitaso yachal lomer lo l'soch shel chavercha ani nachnas. You and I have a problem, but I'm in Ruvain's property. Levi says to Shimon, I hate you, but when I'm in the property, I'm not standing on your property. Ve'eni nichnas l'soch shelcha. Fourth case, let's say that you and I have an Isser Hana between us, and I own the Beis HaMerchatz, I own the olive press, but I rented it out. When I rent out this property that I own, and somebody else is using it now, are you, who's Mudar Hana from me, allowed to use the property that I currently own, but that I've lent out? So says the Gemara, it depends. If you really still have ownership in that property, let's say, I'm going to make this up, but let's say you're allowed to enter the premises whenever you want. Let's assume that was the parameter. So then Asr, that's still called an Isser Hana. Let's paint the picture again. So Ruvain and Shimon are partners, but Shimon really doesn't like Ruvain. He's Madir Hana, and he says, I never want to get benefit from you. And Ruvain owns the bathhouse, and he would like to take a shower. Only one bathhouse in town, so he wants to go take a shower. So Ruvain he rented it out to Chaim. So he goes to Chaim, says, can I take a shower? He's like, oh, I heard you have an Isser Hana from Ruvain. I don't know if you're allowed to use this. Oh, what's the nafkamina? The Gemara says, well, if there's tfisas yad, if there still is some ownership, then you can't use the shower because that means that Ruvain still has his hands on it. And because he still has his hands on it, if you shower here, it's an Isser Hana.
The distinction is that if he doesn't have ownership of the bathhouse entity, but he has ownership of the real estate. Right?
So there you're talking Rishonim level.
It's like Jesus, yeah.
I know. It's correct.
I can hear if he has ownership in the bathhouse, where he got a bathhouse business and he rented out the business to somebody else, I can hear why he's still.
Let's talk in our terms, right? People lease nursing homes all the time. Okay, so if I have an Isser Hana from a person who owns the business, the big owner, the big dog, he owns the business, but he rented it out to a smaller company. He didn't want to deal with it, so he gets a monthly lease payment from the renter. But other than that, and maybe he gets some dividends, that may be the nafkamina, right? If he gets dividends from the house in addition to the rental fee, he definitely does tfisas yad. That's for sure.
On the operation side,
Right.
if he still has a piece of
The
the
two sons
operation,
are generally two sons.
which is different than, but you could also.
I'm out of my own depth, but you get the point.
You could also make the argument that he's still getting Hana as the landlord.
Yeah.
It's probably the case. I mean,
I don't know.
Right.
Jesus, yeah.
no, these are words that require a lot of commentary for sure.
Right. Some operating control, which this landlord probably doesn't.
So that might be like Phil was saying, there's like real estate contracts that you have a escalator if the business does really well.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
That's right, like
the landlord gets more money.
I think that's for sure tfisas yad.
Right.
That's for sure tfisas yad. But I think the question you're asking, if I own the real estate, but I really have nothing to do with the building,
Right.
so then it's a little
more
more.
the benefit, because he comes in, he pays the fee to whoever's operating the Ameriplex. But then that still is helping that guy pay his rent.
It's a little more indirect.
But it is indirect because I'm not getting a percentage of the proceeds.
Right.
Because I, as the renter of that property, I pay your rent is $800 a month. I write you a check every month, ACH. You get it, just goes into your account. I didn't even think about it. So yeah, but maybe that's not tfisas yad. I'm not saying. To David's point, this is a week's worth of research on what the Rishonim would define as tfisas yad. Ritva, Rashba, Ran, everybody. You got to dig in and figure out what it means. And if we were in a Choshen Mishpat Kolel, that's exactly what we would be doing right now, is trying to figure out how the Chachamim view tfisas yad. But L'maisa, that's what the Mishnah's distinction is that if Shimon wants to benefit from Ruvain's bathhouse, Ruvain's whatever, and he rented it out to Chaim, how does that work? So if Yeshlam tfisas yad, then Aser, because that would be an Isser Hana. If Meilam tfisas yad, then Mutter. Last case for the day. Ha'omer lechavero. Konim leveischa shani nechnas. I'm never going to enter into your house. The sadcha shani lokech, and your field. I'm never going to benefit from your field. And then meis o shemachor la'acher. That's mutter. However, if it wasn't about you the owner, that he says to Ruvain, your field, your house, and then the you part of it dies. So then the property now separates from the you because it's your field, Ruvain. But if Ruvain is dead, Ruvain can't own anything anymore, and therefore the Isser Hana status falls away, and I can benefit from those properties. Masha Ein Kain, if his language was different, so gentle, it's the language of you versus the language of it. If he says, Konam buys Zed, this thing over here, Shani Nichnas, I'm never going to go into your house. Sadezu Shani Lokech, I'm never going to take your property. And then Ruvain dies, Meso Shemachar Lacher, then Aser.
Even the first case, it's a stay of Kuza, right? And it's, no. If it's a field that's near Israel, it's going to go to the Yovish eventually.
No, but in the meantime, the regular rules apply. Just that in the Yovel year, everything reverts. But in the meantime, we've used regular rules of Choshen Mishpat, I presume. I don't know. I'm not.
Good news is the Rosh says the Gemara will explain is tfisas yad. How much tfisas yad you need.
Yeah.
I think there's
What's
It's
the
a shame.
good news ahead of us.
But why do we even need to mention it? I mean, there's no finish there.
Where? Which case? This one?
The last case is much of shot. If you say that I'm never going into Phil's house versus I'm not going into 31 whatever Sherwin, then it's clear as day. Or what? Not sure. You're on Chase. Right.
Chase. Also, you were about to give away my house, so you can give away the one on Sherwin, as long as it's not my sister's house.
Is it the same number?
No, it's not the same number. Yeah, it's a good question. We'll see if the Gemara is Mechadesh, but it is important for us to know, and we've discussed this a number of times in this Masechta, is that the difference between saying you and saying it could be the difference of a neder and a non-neder. That's for sure true. But we only became sensitized to that by learning the Masechta. It's not like we were like, we're on Me'aratz and we wouldn't know one way or the other. But like, I'm wondering if there's actually a difference between this broad you versus it. I don't know what we would have thought without the Gemara. We're going to stop right here. We'll pick up with the Gemara on Shabbos 30 minutes before Mincha. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
That's also, you know, in mall, that's the way.